for Black on Black.
Hello and welcome. In tonight's show, my guests are both journalists, though of very different kinds. I'll be talking to Zainab Badawi, presenter of Yorkshire Television's A Question of Economics, about the fortnight's international news, while Baz Bamingboy, the Daily Mail's Showbiz columnist, will be revealing why he became the bane of Britain's royals.
Well, I haven't got any royals tonight, Beverly, but did anyone see Prince last night posing on that show with a rather pink spider on his shoulder? Well, talking in the music world, the inside information is that pirate radio favourite Second Image could be this year's British soul success. We'll be hearing them in studio later. On video, a report from London's amusement arcades on the growing worry that black teenagers are getting hooked on computer games. While on a lighter note, I'll be talking to Go-Go King Little Benny, who's brought his new dance, Happy Feet, from Washington to London. And I'll be previewing the Oscar-nominated film that's moved the whole of black America, Soldier's Story.
Hello, may I speak freely?
You haven't stopped yet.
But more of that in part two. Over to you, Beverly.
Well, we start in an area of vital concern to all black families in Britain. It's education. For some years now, it's been widely believed that a fairly large number of black children are being suspended from school on the grounds that they are disruptive. The issue has now come to a head in Nottingham. Recently leaked figures show an alarmingly high rate of suspensions among black school children, and the revelation has provoked a major row. Del Onia has been talking to parents and community leaders in Nottingham.
Yes.
These children are going to the Marcus Garvey Community Centre in Nottingham. They shouldn't be here, they should be in class. But these children don't go to school. They've been banned from lessons by their head teachers. And many have been barred from entering the school gate for reasons which their families feel are unfair and unnecessary.
So why is it that Eddie been suspended all this time? Everything. If he come late, you suspend him. If he and somebody else fight, you suspend him, not the person who you fight with. If somebody hit him, you suspend him. If somebody said something, you suspend him. I say, oh, what's all this?
If, like, a black person argues with a teacher, they're more liable to say to get out of the classroom and get to the headmaster. But if a white person just say, sit down and behave yourself.
Because they were convinced their children were getting a raw deal, parents in Nottingham got together to demand action. They went to a local community project, UKD, who took up the parents' fight and went to Nottinghamshire County Council. The response from education chiefs was positive. They agreed to monitor suspensions in local schools for a year. But when last April the time came for them to release their findings at a meeting with black parents, they pulled out. The parents soon realised why when a confidential copy of the council report was leaked to them. What that report showed was that while black children made up only 6% of the school population, they received 34% of suspensions. Proportionately, this meant that a black child was 8 times more likely to be suspended than other children in the schools monitored by Nottinghamshire County Council. For this group of parents, the figures reinforced what their children had been telling them.
He went across where they were serving the dinner after he had his dinner, and the teacher told him to get outside, and he said he's waiting for one of his cousins or something. And the teacher said, you'll do as you're told here, or you'll get out. He said, I'm waiting for my cousin. And they suspend him.
But the findings in Nottingham are not unique. Other cities have similar problems. For instance, in Birmingham, while only 10% of school children are black, they receive 40% of suspensions. Proportionately, this means black children are 6 times more likely to be suspended. And the situation is being treated so seriously that the Birmingham Commission for Racial Equality is releasing a full report on it next month. and in Nottingham, the parents are refusing to let the matter rest. In this report, they demanded answers to why their children are losing out in the classroom.
We challenge that there be an investigation into the way in which suspensions are actually done, because we felt that there was inconsistencies in how some schools interpreted, suspendable offences.
After studying individual cases of suspensions amongst children in his youth group, Leslie Davies found that one of the main causes of suspension is white teachers' misunderstanding of black mannerisms, which are interpreted as rudeness and defiance.
I think it's just a cultural orientation which the kids have to move in certain ways, and probably sometimes, when they are a bit upset, they do look certain ways, but I think it's totally exaggerated by teachers in schools, and I think teachers should really come down and get to understand the expressions of black people more.
A second reason is that black children like these often find themselves in racially tense situations where they instinctively retaliate. As a result, they are seen as the aggressors rather than the victims.
They get racially abused, they know it's wrong, and they react to it. A lot of kids who are suspended from school, it usually stems from them being racially abused, and in the end, the child hits out, and the teacher uses the actual end result of it to judge the whole situation.
And thirdly, there are educational problems that affect the performance of young blacks. They lose interest in lessons because school curricula do not cater to their needs and preferences. Although the council was aware of the strong feelings in the community, they refused to publish their findings on suspensions. But when the black parents held a protest rally in Nottingham last month, things changed. Realising that black groups were not going to let the matter die down so easily, Nottinghamshire County Council suddenly decided to take action. They finally released this scant two-page statement on suspensions in the hope that it would take the heat out of the situation. But when the black parents actually saw the way in which the council had presented the figures, it only rekindled their ardent belief that there had been a council cover-up. What the council had done was to dilute the number of black suspensions. They divided the figure amongst all the schools in Nottingham, although they had not all been monitored. So it appeared that black children were only twice as likely to be suspended.
They presented us with some figures. Again, these figures do not match up to the original figures they collected. So they issued those bogus figures as we see them.
So the argument continues between the parents and the council, and various solutions have been put up.
Perhaps more black teachers in school would help to solve this, because of course they would be more or less talking the same language or understanding children easier. Black teachers would be able to understand black children more easily, I think, more than the white teachers perhaps would.
But while the debate rages, black children remain the victims as their education suffers.
And you were suspended?
Yeah.
Was you taken back?
Yeah.
And how old are you now?
14.
You're 14 and you've spent, what, about 8 months out of school, 6 months out of school?
Yeah.
Do you think that's going to have an effect on your learning?
Yeah, a lot of effect.
And you'd like to be back in school?
Yeah.
And it is cases like that that have strengthened the parents' resolve to continue their fight for action to the end.
We will go to as much lengths as possible to eradicate the problem of suspension from the schools in Nottingham and around the country, because it's our future, it's our youngsters, it's their education that's at risk, and their future is our future, so we cannot let it rest here.
Well, we did approach Nottinghamshire County Council to get their side of the story, but they refused to take part on the grounds that putting their views forward on this programme would serve no useful purpose. Well, now the news from abroad. To discuss the main stories, I'm joined by a Sudanese-born journalist who's recently come to national attention as the presenter of Yorkshire TV's A Question of Economics. Please welcome Zainab Badawi. Well, Zainab, your programme goes out on Channel 4 on Sundays, and I personally found it very useful, but is it aimed at people like me?
Well, yes, it's aimed at everybody who is a little bit confused by the terms that we're constantly bombarded with in the news, things like the FT index, the money supply, even inflation. We felt that there was a real need for people to be informed about these things, because a lot of people seem to get the idea that economics is a very technical subject which is better left to the experts, nothing to do with them. But in fact that's not true. If we, think about it, we should realise that economics affects our everyday lives and decisions. So therefore we wish to provide this information for everybody who might be interested in economics.
Now, is economics a science in the way that, say, chemistry or physics is a science, so that you can calculate things and add things up and it all works out perfectly? Or do you think political considerations have an impact on economics?
Well, economics can be taken really in two ways. It can be a very technical subject. You can restrict yourself to dealing with various models or whatever, but also economics does apply to the real world. And if we think about it, politics and economics are really inextricably linked. For instance, the major parties in Britain today largely differ on economic questions. And we see this happening particularly in the developing world. Let's take Africa, where economics and politics do go hand in hand, and a political leader who is mismanaging the economy is going to be a very unpopular person.
Well, I certainly want to discuss this with you further in a few moments, but let's have a look now at the news worldwide. The famine that's been raging across North Africa may be about to claim its first political victims, in addition to its vast toll of human lives. In the Sudan, the government is struggling to cope with an influx of 1 million refugees from Ethiopia and Chad. To add to its problems, the long-running civil war in the south has been stepped up by rebel guerrillas. The rebels have succeeded in disrupting fuel supplies to the capital, Khartoum. Anxiety that these problems might undermine Sudan's pro-American government has prompted Western countries to offer millions of dollars in emergency aid. America and European governments fear that any replacement for military strongman President Numeri could let in a regime friendly to the leader of neighbouring Libya, Colonel Muammar Gaddafi. In South Africa, protests have continued against the new parliament, which now includes Asian and coloured members. Mr. Botha says that his parliament is multiracial. Unfortunately for his international credibility, it isn't multiracial enough to include the country's black citizens. And even more disappointing for him, leaders like Winnie Mandela have been quick to let the world know that they regard his latest idea of a separate assembly for blacks as a toothless sham. And black South Africans clearly remain unconvinced by Mr. Botha's attempts to persuade the world that apartheid can have a human face. Last week, he offered Nelson Mandela freedom if he'd renounced the use of violence as a political tactic. Zinzi Mandela delivered her father's prompt and clear answer.
My father says, I cannot and will not give any undertaking at a time when I and you, the people, are not free. Your freedom and mine cannot be separated.
In the United States, anti-apartheid protests outside the South African embassy have escalated in spite of a court ruling that bans them from picketing within 50 yards of the building. 600 people have been arrested, including the children of Robert Kennedy, Douglas and Rory. Singer Harry Belafonte this Thursday became the latest addition to a growing list of well-known Americans who've been arrested on the picket line. After a tour of South America, the Pope paused in Trinidad for 7 hours last week on his way back to Rome. The Pope has been telling South Americans to be wary that liberation theology with its Marxist sympathies could take them away from God. But for Trinidadians, he had nothing but praise.
I want to tell you my admiration for the way in which people of different races, religions, and traditions live together in harmony in your country.
The Pope has promised to visit the Caribbean later in the year, and he intends to call in at both Jamaica and Cuba. But it remains to be seen whether the larger islands will merit more hours on the papal clock than Trinidad. Well, Zainab, as someone who was born in the Sudan and who goes back there regularly, I imagine that that story will be of most interest to you. Just how serious is the political crisis at the moment? Is the president likely to be toppled?
Well, I think there can be no doubt that President Numeri is under considerable pressure at the moment, and there is evidence that he's becoming increasingly isolated. And if you look at the problems he's having to confront, it's hardly surprising. There's a famine which threatens the lives of nearly 5 million people in the Sudan. He's mismanaged the economy very badly in the last few years, which has pushed the country further and further into debt, so that now the Sudanese government owes something like $9,000 million. As we've just seen in the clip, the problem of refugees coming from Ethiopia and Eritrea and Chad also adds to the pressure in that they are moving towards the cities, and therefore they are quite visible to the urban citizens in Khartoum, in Omdurman and so on, and this doesn't make them very happy at all. And of course, there's a civil war which has been raging in the Sudan for the last 30 years, and this has been stepped up by the rebels in the south, and this must be another headache for the president. I mean, so far, the southern rebels haven't won any military victories, but what they have done is to thwart development in the south. They impede oil operations, and they're hampering aid getting into the south. So, you know, that's a great problem. But Numeri's a great survivor. He's been in power for nearly 16 years, and of course he has a great ally in the United States of America, who are quite keen to see him in power because, as you said, he provides an ally against Gaddafi in Libya and Mengistu in Ethiopia. I think any threat to Numeri would have to come from within the army itself.
Right. Well, tell me something. Do you think that Sudan is in the papers at the moment because of the civil war suddenly getting very, very dangerous to him, or what is the explanation for that? We're suddenly hearing about the Sudan. We haven't heard about it in the past.
No, I mean, you know, as I said, the war has been going on for nearly 30 years, in which, if I may add, I think I'm right in saying more people have died in the civil war in the Sudan than in the entire Arab-Israeli war. And I think the reason why we're hearing about Sudan now is not because these problems are new. They've been going on for a long time. And, of course, the famine there is not something which has happened out of the blue. But, obviously, famine is news. And because of the problem with the refugees in Ethiopia, it's coming to the attention of the world press. And I think it's sad, perhaps, that we don't get a more constant coverage of the problems of countries in Africa, say like the Sudan, so that people can understand, you know, the reasons which make famines occur, rather than just focus on how can we get aid to these countries and distribute it properly. Why is the aid needed in the first place?
So you're saying really that this is the media suddenly blowing something up that's been going on all the time, and you don't think Numeri is under any threat at the moment?
I don't think he's under any real threat, no. He's pulled through so many times before. He is going quite far because, for instance, the Americans would like to see a settlement with the Southerners, self-determination or whatever, and at the moment he seems a bit reluctant or unwilling or for whatever reason to implement any change. But I think he'll pull through. But no, I mean, Sudan has had famines before. The problem of refugees for the Sudan is nothing new. We border 8 countries in Africa. You know, it's a free-for-all. We've always had refugees coming in from Kenya, Uganda, Chad, Cameroon, all these places.
Right. Well, now I'd like to ask you about another story that we covered, which is the growing American pressure on the South Africans. Do you think that this has affected the South African government's attitude to its own people?
I'm not sure whether that's happened now, but I personally am very glad to see that we are seeing something now which wouldn't have happened 10 years ago, and that is that Black America is now looking at the problems of Africa, and I think there can be no doubt that they could influence American government policy on the question of South Africa and hopefully work to the dismantling of apartheid. If we think about the Americans in the United States, they form, I think, something like 12% of the population. That's about 27 million people. Now, I think it would be nice to think if the Black Americans can do for South Africa what the American Jews have done for Israel. And when you think that the American Jews, I think, are only something like 5.5 million people in America,
now I must take you on to the newspapers. Is there a story that particularly caught your eye this week?
Yes, just this one here. It's got the title A White House Plan to Woo the Blacks, and it's what we were talking about the fact that the American blacks are now becoming more important as a political force, and so something is being done about the awful conditions in which they live in the inner cities. Well, we really have a similar problem here in Britain. The Rights of 81 brought the needs of the inner cities to the attention of the British, and it would be nice to think that the blacks in Britain are going to have influence in politics on the national level for something to be done about these problems. Is there anything else that caught your eye? Oh, well, just one last story. A funny one, that the sixth biggest killer apparently in Africa is, believe it or not, road accidents. I thought it'd be some awful disease, you know, but apparently not. So that was a surprise to me. Killer cars, yes. Are you a killer driver? No, I'm a pretty good driver. I don't know what this is going on about, really. Well, thank you very much indeed for having come on the show. Zainab. Thank you. Given the recently reported views of one government minister, it's probably worth repeating the fact that most black people in Britain are now British citizens. But our country's immigration rules still seem to catch out an extraordinary number of black people on the wrong side of the law. Even so, few people would expect to see a Christian minister on the run from the immigration service. Nick Finnis reports.
This is an Anglican church in East London, but today's service is far from the standard Church of England ceremony. Both the words of the service and its rituals belong to the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. What's more, most of the congregation are Christian Rastafarians.
For the whole world we beseech that God should hasten his purpose and put into the mind of all and each to desire that which is good and expedient.
Abba Bahani Selassie is the only officially ordained priest in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church who will baptize and minister to Rastafarians. His congregation has come to see him as their guiding light and leader. But if the government has its way, that light will be extinguished. The Home Office wants to deport Abba Selassie for overstaying on a visitor's visa, but the Abba refuses to leave.
The decision I have made is because I know there is no one else in this unique situation which I am in. If there was another Ethiopian ordained priest, not necessarily Ethiopian born, but ordained priest, who would do what I am doing, then that would force me to reconsider the decision which I've taken. But there isn't.
To avoid being deported, Abba Selassie's gone into hiding. Today he holds his service in secret. And because of his commitment to his Rastafarian flock, his own church hierarchy won't help. Since the Ethiopian coup of 1975, the country's Marxist government has ordered the official church to bar Rastas because of their continued reverence for the deposed emperor Haile Selassie.
It's a policy of the Mengistu regime not to minister onto the Rastafarians. We find that wherever there are Ethiopian churches in the Western Hemisphere, then they are not really welcome.
The Grenadian-born Abba Selassie never agreed with this policy. This attitude always put him in conflict with his superiors in the United States, where he was ordained. In the past few years, he's regularly visited Britain in an effort to build a congregation which included Rastas. In 1983, he decided to remain here permanently, but the Home Office turned down his application to stay and told him to go back to the United States. They've also made it clear that he's unlikely to be readmitted quickly, if at all. In the past, for example in the case of Zola Budd, discretion has been exercised in order to treat some applications quickly and sympathetically. But in Home Office eyes, the spiritual needs of British Rastafarians simply don't carry the same weight as Olympic medal prospects.
They're generous towards Commonwealth citizens who have parents born here. They're generous towards citizens of the EEC. But they're very restrictive to the needs of the black community, to the family and close relations of black people settled here, and to, as in this case, the religious needs of the black communities as well.
As well as political objections, the Home Office has provoked religious opposition. Kenneth Leach, an Anglican minister who helped Abba Selassie to find a base for his church, argues that a unique effort to make Christianity relevant to young British blacks is being frustrated by the Home Office's narrow-mindedness.
I think what they do need to do, though, is to take seriously the fact that here we have an important community of, for the most part, British-born black people who are trying to worship God in this particular way.
When we approached Home Office Minister David Waddington about the case, one of the reasons he gave us for the deportation order was that the Ethiopian Orthodox Church has advised us that Abba Bahani is no longer a priest or a member of the church. To the Rastafarians, our conservative government is simply supporting the Ethiopian regime in a denial of their religious freedom. In their view, Abba Selassie's case is more than an immigration problem. It's become a struggle for the right to worship.
All of the churches has rejected us, and he's the only one willing to take us up, you know? So we got to fight for him as much as we can, you know, and give as much support.
By all means, we'll be supporting him with everything we got, down to our last penny, if we work it that way, because, I mean, we are dealing with God.
After him gone, who will take up the fight for us? Who will support us? Who will minister unto us? So we're going to try our very best to try and keep him.
If I have to be here illegally, you know, to uphold the divine law and minister to my community, as much as I do not wish that situation to happen, I will continue to be here illegally to minister unto them.
Well, unless the Home Office relents, Abba Selassie could be in hiding for some time. We'll be keeping an eye on that story and let you know about any further developments. And now, here's a man who's never yet been caught. With his view of the fortnight, Craig Charles.
Is it really any wonder that the blacks are going under, when the government would never ever consider to begin giving jobs to people with the slightest miscolouring of skin? Because the man in charge of putting decent work into your hand thinks that all the blackies come from bongo land. It's hard these days to read the news. It gives you the political blues. Mrs. Thatcher said on telly that her party's major pain was she couldn't send her immigrants right back from whence they came. She was probably worried about the cost, which proves that she's a fool, because it can't cost all that much to send me back home to Liverpool. These days it's hard to read the news. It gives you the political blues. And although these facts have only recently arisen, you can't be that informed if you're a little bit surprised. You see, at the last election, and I'll be pretty blunt, the press proved that certain Tories had been prominent members of the National Front. So it isn't any wonder that there's people going under. I mean, the Labour Party haven't even got their act together. They can't begin to brave even the brightest, bluest weather. Then there's Mr. Arthur Scargill, the Marxist puppet. He can't handle a bike, never mind a miners' strike. He's proved that he's a muppet. But the miners are living in a critical condition, whilst Arthur pursues his own political ambition. But the miners gave him the licence to abuse. I bet they've got the political blues.
Our very own Craig Charles. Well, that's it for part one, but don't go away, because we'll be back in a moment with the kids who are getting hooked on computer games, Pauline's preview with Diana Ross's tribute to Marvin Gaye, Fleet Street's Showbiz oracle Baz Bamigboy, plus sweet soul music from Second Image.
Such a long time ago. Now I know you never left my mind. It's not too late. We can recreate our love. Will we find the answer we've been looking for? Do you know where we've been going wrong? Whatever happens, we never last for long. Starting again, we had the world to share. Starting again, we had no time to share. Let's take a chance. Romance is hanging in the air. Now is the time to start again. Starting again. Don't put up a fight, we can make it right. Capture it once again. Starting again. From again. Starting again. We can start our life tonight. We can make it right, babe. Starting again.
That was Second Image with Starting Again. Now, what have you been up to, Pauline?
Oh, Beverly, I've been hanging around in a lot of amusement arcades, actually. Now, seriously, I've been looking at a disturbing new fad amongst young blacks. Amusement arcades have always held a fascination for teenagers, but recently community workers have become worried that this pleasant way of passing the time is not as innocent as it may seem. Look familiar? Well, you can find these kind of machines not just in amusement arcades, but in pubs, clubs, takeaways, and minicab offices all around the country. Well, just a bit of harmless fun, some people would say. But is it? In the last few months, these computer games have been causing a lot of problems in Britain's black community. From the moment these machines arrived in Britain, they were a hit.
They originally came from Japan in 1977, the first one being a game called Space Invaders, which was an instant hit because it was bright, the lights were hypnotic, it was very fast, and although relatively simple, it was still quite competitive, you know, very much shoot them, kill them format.
And so kids throughout the country started amusement arcade Star Wars. But as the games have become more sophisticated, there has been a disturbing new development. Black youngsters have become machine addicts.
It normally gets started with children leaving home early for school. The arcades are open. A friend said, oh, let's stop for the arcade for 5 minutes. It end up, they're there for half an hour. They use the bus fare to go into the arcades. They then start using the lunch money to go into the arcades, so it just keeps on and getting worse.
And this fascination with computer games has become progressively more expensive. How much would you say you spent in a day?
One of them. I said the most I could spend in a day is about maybe £2 or £3. Not that I can afford it, but...
Well, how much money do you spend?
£2. No more than that.
Do you make that a strict rule that you don't go above a certain amount of money?
Yeah. Otherwise, I could just, you know, just keep putting it in. But I have to give myself a limit.
But what is particularly worrying community figures now is that this addiction to computer games is breeding a generation of gamblers. Gambling machines like these sit side by side with Space Invader machines in most amusement arcades. And it seems only a matter of time before teenage addicts move on to them.
From the kids I've seen, they do go in for amusement in the first place, but it can eventually end up becoming compulsive.
And Alan, who was once a compulsive gambler himself, knows the consequences of that addiction.
there were times when I would lie and cheat to obviously finance my gambling. And there's a big problem there for the ones that go short, or the ones that suffer most, are your closest, your wives and children. And there are people who actually go to prison because of gambling.
And that is something that is particularly worrying community workers, who've noticed that more and more black teenagers are frequenting amusement arcades. They know that gambling addicts often turn to crime.
Now, we have evidence that children are spending £10 a week or more. £10 is average. £10 a week or more on these arcades. Now, if you only get £3 pocket money and you spend £10 a week, it means that you get money from somewhere. Now, there's only one or two sources that they can get it without robbing a bank, and that is from the from the parents' pocket, from their friends borrowing it, or from little petty crime.
Now Parliament is planning a bill to stop people under 18 from frequenting amusement arcades. Although arcades like this one voluntarily carry such a notice, many youngsters ignore the ruling. However, when it becomes law, they will have no choice. But until that happens, the problem will remain.
We know of people who have, their children have actually stolen from them amounts ranging from £10 to £150. And all that is spent on the machines.
Meanwhile, there will still be temptation in every high street, and the fear now is that it will be impossible for teenagers to resist the gambling habit. Well, I can assure you it's easy to get sucked in by those machines. I'd already lost a fiver by the time the crew dragged me off to the next location. But anyway, let's lighten up now with this week's preview.
I'm a soldier, Peterson, and the kind of colored man that don't like lazy, shiftless Negroes.
A Black Army platoon stationed in America's Deep South is the setting for a soldier's story, which hits our screens next month. It's already up for the Best Film Oscar, and Adolf Caesar has been nominated Best Actor. Here we see Adolf as the sergeant and his men in action.
You trying to mock me, CJ?
No, Sir Sarge.
Good. Because whatever an ignorant, low-class Geechee like you has to say ain't worth paying attention to. Is it? Is it?
I reckon not, Sarge. You a creep, Waters. Sarge, just joking, Pete. He don't mean no harm.
No, he does. I mean, we're taking her from them white boys.
Yes, you do. And if it wasn't for you southern niggas, white folks wouldn't think we was all fools.
Well, where you from? England?
9 and 4 months.
Another Oscar favourite opens in 2 weeks' time. Places in the Heart has 7 nominations, including Best Film. Set in Waxahachie, Texas, during the Depression, it introduces black actor Danny Glover as a hobo who runs a white widow's farm. Here we see Glover making an impression on her young son.
Here, you take this rabbit foot. And you do what I do and say what I say, you understand? First thing is you turn around 3 times. 1, 2, 3. Next thing is you walk backwards. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you, Lord Jesus. Amen.
Thank you, Lord Jesus. Amen.
Give me back my rabbit foot. Got too much to do around here to go around saving your life all the time.
Gospel. Well, if you're hooked on groups like the London Community Gospel Choir, here's a chance to swat up on the subject. An excellent new book, The History of Gospel by Viv Broughton, will be in the shops next month. I asked the choir's leader, Reverend Basil Mead, what he thought of it.
This book is the very first book written by somebody from the UK on the history of gospel music. And this book is showing what went on behind the scenes back in the 60s and the 70s, how it all got started here in the UK as well as in the Americas. I didn't know that you actually had gospel groups coming here from the US back in the 1870s to the Fisk Jubilee Singers. And this is one thing that Viv brought out in the book. He did a lot of research, which I must compliment him for.
Still with books, two classic black detective thrillers are back in print, Cotton Comes to Harlem and The Crazy Kill. Author Chester Himes wrote about the black underworld while serving a 20-year sentence for armed robbery in the 1930s. Incidentally, he also introduced the term black on black. Meanwhile, at London's Cockpit Gallery, the Black Triangle exhibition is on until February 27th. These photographs, taken by Ahmet Francis over a 14-year period, focus on the legacy of slavery and colonisation. And tomorrow, the impressive exhibition of photographs, Nomads of Niger by Carol Beckwith, opens at the October Gallery in London. That's on until March 16th. Now to music, and the latest US funk fad Go-Go, which even has its own dance called Happy Feet. Little Benny's Go-Go single, Who Comes to Boogie, has just been released, and it's the usual mix of get-down and party stuff. Well, when he arrived in town on Friday, I asked him about the style and the dance.
Chuck Brown, he started this style back in the early 70s, and I started in the late 70s, and it picked up from there. You know, everybody started eventually getting into it. It's just a dance with people just be going with the beat of the music, and they just shuffle their feet from side to side, and their body be, you know, going with their feet.
Make it real funky when you do it, y'all.
And finally, Diana Ross's tribute to Marvin Gaye, her longtime and much-missed friend. Written by Lionel Richie, it's called Missing You, so get your hankies out.
Since you've been away, I've been down and lonely. Since you've been away, I've been thinking of you. Trying to understand the reason you left me. What were you going through? Ooh, ooh, I'm missing you. Tell me why the road turns. Ooh.
Not a dry eye in the house. Well, next week's programme is a special edition, so there won't be a preview. But don't worry, because we'll be back with a new package for you at the beginning of March. But before Beverly and I disappear in a great flood of tears in our makeup runs, let's get on with the show, eh?
Yeah, Diana Ross is absolutely wonderful, isn't she? Never seems to change. But now on to royalty. 27-year-old Baz Bamigboy is one of the most respected and feared gossip columnists and showbiz writers in Britain. However, his relations with the famous and the British royal family haven't always been conducted at an aristocratic level. For instance, 2 years ago, his pursuit of behind-the-scenes stories about Prince Andrew and Koo Stark got him the royal boot from the island of Mystique. Here he is on his return to London, telling ITN News how the prince reacted to the press and what he'd been doing.
Oh, a few grunts and groans, a couple of jokes, and really spent the time sleeping and doing other things.
Did he say anything about the press following him?
No, but looks said it all, I think.
What did they say?
Were the heavies with him, Ness? Well, the looks sort of said, you know, why didn't you leave me alone?
And why didn't you?
I was enjoying myself.
Baz, it's very good to see you. Now, can you explain to me how you got to Mystique in the first place? It can't have been easy.
It wasn't. It was great difficulty, actually. I mean, I disguised myself as a kind of worker on Mystique. It's a private island, you see.
Yeah.
So we flew from Barbados to Mystique, and then because I had this dreadfully English accent, they kind of didn't take it in right, so I was kicked back off again. We had to hire a yacht from the neighbouring island of St Vincent, go to Mystique, row on, and just appear. And we did that every day for 2 weeks. It was great fun.
Now, it wasn't the heavies that got rid of you. Who threw you off the island exactly?
Who threw us off the island? Well, it was all the kind of the the royal bodyguards, they didn't want us there. The actual owner of the island, Colin Tennant, he sort of soon got us off. But I just sort of spent most of the day hiding in bushes, so they didn't know I was there half the time anyway.
Well, you obviously have a great time, but you did start off in print journalism as a serious Fleet Street journalist. Why did you decide to make showbiz your main sphere of activities?
Well, I love showbiz. I actually personally like movies and the theatre and the nightlife. And I used to write about crime when I was on the stand and that sort of thing. It was a bit too heavy at times. But showbiz is fun. I love it.
Would you be in movies yourself if you got the chance?
No, I think I'm a bit too big, you know. They call me the Incredible Bulk.
Oh, Incredible Bulk. I do like that. But I'm sure that there's one thing you will be covering soon, and that's the Oscar Awards. Now, there are two big pictures that were mentioned in preview that have blacks in them, and they've been nominated.
That's right, A Soldier's Story and Places in the Heart. I'm a little bit disappointed, actually, with A Soldier's Story. It's got, I think, 7 nominations, including Best Picture. Adolph Caesar, who you saw, has a Best Supporting Actor nomination. But the star of the film, Howard Rowlands Jr., who you may remember as the lead in Ragtime a few years ago, he's great in the part, and he's been totally overlooked. You know, I was sick when I heard the nominations. And also Danny Glover in Places in the Heart. He's great in the film, a master. You know, he's really a great actor, and he's been left out as well.
Well, do you think it's that Hollywood doesn't take black actors seriously? Is that the reason, perhaps?
It could be that, yes. I mean, apart from Eddie Murphy, you know, the big superstar, other black actors, you know, unless they bring in the dirt at the box office, they don't really mean that much, you see.
Yes, well, speaking of Eddie Murphy, you actually met him when he was in London recently. How did he seem to you? What's he like?
Well, on the big screen in Beverly Hills Cop, I laughed till I cried almost. But in the flesh, a little disappointing. You know, he sat there with his diamond sort of belt buckle, this is just brass, of course, mine, and his great big chunky gold watch, but he's very dull. You know, he's surrounded by about 10 flunkies who, you know, sort of, it was not very nice.
Yes. Well, now, Purple Rain didn't get nominated. What do you think about Prince? Do you think that was a terrible oversight?
Not particularly, no.
Not a Prince fan?
I like Prince on record, but I'd sort of rather not sit and watch him at the movies or sort of have to talk to him. God. I mean, I may not make any fans, but I mean, Prince arrived in London yesterday and I saw him at his hotel in the West End. And he doesn't speak. I said, "Do you speak?" And he said, I mean, and then I sort of suddenly got this sort of hand on my shoulder, and I reminded them politely that this was not LA but London, so leave me alone, please.
But clearly you have to be fairly bulky and large to do your sort of business, don't you?
Well, yeah, because you have to eat a lot and drink a lot, you see.
Oh,
so it's got to go somewhere, so I have a rather large stomach.
And give the bodyguard some exercise.
That's right, absolutely.
Well, we've been talking about black Americans, but what about black Britons? Is there anybody you think that's likely to make international stardom amongst our black performers?
What kind of like Britain's answer to Eddie Murphy?
Yes, is there somebody?
There isn't. I don't really know why either. I think it's maybe that British production companies don't pump in enough money like they do in the States, or it's just, I suppose, apathy on the part of maybe the public. I don't know. But I suppose Lenny Henry is our best bet. Yes. He's got a new series starting on the BBC in September. And I think, I don't know, next couple of years, I think Lenny Henry could make it. He could be...
Would you say he's as talented as Americans or not? I mean, is that an unfair question to ask you? But he's very popular and he's very funny.
Yeah, he's very popular in Britain.
You think he has an English humour, perhaps?
Yeah, very English. It doesn't travel, you see.
Yeah.
Wonderful thing about Eddie Murphy, he has a great crossover appeal. Everyone likes him because he's funny. And kind of he can transcend all barriers. Now, I don't know if Lenny can. I hope he can, but not just yet, I don't think.
Any other black British stars that take your fancy, that you think are really excellent?
Well, I did like Rusty Lee before she started doing Game for a Laugh. But,
Thank you, Baz.
and rolling her eyes, but you know.
What is it about her performance on Game for a Laugh that you think is less attractive?
She's a throwback to those kind of Uncle Tom characters of, 40 years ago. And I was really disappointed, actually. I like her personally, but I just don't think she's coming across the way she is, because she's a very clever woman.
Yes.
And I think maybe dear Alan Boyd, who produces it, is... not doing the right things with her.
Have you got a tip for the top for this year?
Tip for the top? I reckon Clark Peters, who was in The Wiz, who was great, it was just around Christmas time, he's going to be with Lulu in The Guys and Dolls, which is transferring to the West End soon.
Which part is he playing?
He's playing, I think he's playing Sky Masterson, I'm not too
Really?
sure. But he should
role.
be good. And of course it's a black guy playing a white role, but I think he's going to be great.
Yes. Well, we look forward to seeing you being thrown out of places in the future and reading you, of course. Thanks very much indeed, Baz.
Thank you.
before we end, we'd like to ask for your help on an issue of crucial importance to the black community. As many of you may have read in the daily newspapers, the question of whether local authorities should continue to allow black children to be adopted or fostered by white families is an increasingly controversial one. In 2 weeks' time, we'll be devoting a whole programme to this question, including a studio discussion. So if you have any views, or more importantly, any experiences which might contribute to that programme, we'd like to hear from you. The address to write to is Black on Black, Children in Care, London Weekend Television, London SE99 6YW. That's Black on Black, Children in Care, London Weekend Television, London SE99 6YW.
Well, that's it for this week. We'll be back in 2 weeks with that special edition on Children in Care. Until then, we leave you with Second Image and Don't You.
Outside to meet the air of night. Don't you? I love to go above the clouds. You fly so high to meet the moon. Meet the moon. Hey, do you like the wind blowing through your hair at night? The cool air makes me feel so good. You can see the moon shining down a misty night. A love light shining down on you. I say, yeah. Look at the night. It's waiting there for you and me. So dim down the light and come outside. Yeah.
Well, finally tonight in our Pictures of Poland season, shipyard workers in Gdansk, whose efforts in 1980 led to the formation of the trade union Solidarity, remember their colleagues from Gdynia, who 10 years earlier had died in a bloodbath.